The U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging will now come to order. Today's hearing is meant to bring attention to an incredibly important issue for so many of America's seniors, especially as we move into the holiday season. We're here to focus on how to best serve older Americans who want to spend their senior years in the comfort of their own homes. And while there are so many positives about aging in place that we'll highlight today, we're also here to shine a light on the often unreported crisis of isolation and loneliness. We should be doing everything possible to support seniors who strive to age in place, and today we'll focus on how Congress can reauthorize the Older Americans Act, known as the OAA, to continue many critical programs that support seniors with this goal. Last week, we all celebrated Thanksgiving, and later this month, families across America will be celebrating Hanukkah and Christmas. For many of us, that means spending time with family and loved ones. In my case, I got to help my 5-year-old granddaughter win in Uno. She loved to give away +4s to people, and I learned 2/3 of how to do a Rubik's Cube, because that's my 12-year grandson does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressed.
So he told me that the last part was the hardest. While these moments are a time to cherish time with loved ones, they can also be a difficult reminder of loss for older Americans who no longer have the ability to spend the holidays with their friends, spouse, or even their children. We all know the importance of taking care of our seniors. For many older Americans who choose to age in place, our goal should always be to help them have the best possible care and support. They should always have the opportunity to remain in the homes and neighborhoods they love. That is why community, strong families, faith-based organizations, volunteers, OAA programs are so important to our aging population, especially during this time of year. In my home state of Florida, which is quite a bit warmer than it is here, there are many seniors who cannot travel during the holiday season. Thankfully, many communities have the resources to give our seniors the care and attention they deserve. Combating the feeling of isolation and loneliness for our aging community has endless benefits, from better mental and physical health to stronger multi-generational relationships with families and communities, supporting healthier and more resilient communities. We can all agree that community matters. Strong families, faith-based organizations, volunteers, and the programs supported by the OAA create the foundation that allows older Americans to choose who choose to age in place to remain in the homes and neighborhoods they love. That's why supporting the successful programs made possible by the OAA and showing how faith-based groups, nonprofits, and service organizations strengthen families is so important to the work of this committee. During the holidays, when both loneliness and the demand for caregiving rise, these supports become even more critical. Aging in place is good for families, communities, and taxpayers. Strengthening these programs is a bipartisan commitment to dignity, independence, and the American way of life. For 60 years, the OAA has helped innumerable seniors by promoting social connection and life-affirming support programs. Over 10 million older Americans a year are helped by programs covered by the OAA. The OAA continues to serve as the backbone of many assistance programs that help ensure older Americans can age in place with dignity. I'm proud to work with Ranking Member Gillibrand, as well as Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee Chairman Cassidy and Ranking Member Sanders to fight for the reauthorization of this important piece of legislation, which is a critical tool in our arsenal to support seniors. I'm also working with fellow committee member Senator Warnock on legislation to address senior loneliness through Older American Act funding. My Senior Act expands the scope of grants to include services that address the loneliness epidemic facing seniors. And I'm working to pass bipartisan legislation to create a non-refundable tax credit aimed at adults who provide certain care for their parents or older relatives in multi-generational households. My hope is that with this hearing, we can examine how strong community networks help older adults age in place, especially during the holiday season when isolation, caregiver stress, and multi-generational pressures peak. Now, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand from the cold state today of, it snowed, didn't you?
It's cold.
It's snowy, too.
Yeah, I bet it is.
For her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling today's hearing. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. The holidays are when communities come together, whether you celebrate with family or friends or loved ones. Sharing this heartfelt season with the people you love makes all the difference in the world. However, building and participating in one's community is a year-round endeavor and one that can pose unique challenges for older adults and people with disabilities. The most important mechanism that enables this kind of participation is home and community-based services, or HCBS. The HCBS are almost exclusively available through Medicaid, and the availability of services is tied to federal funding. Our witnesses today will discuss the importance of these programs and how they allow older adults and people with disabilities to live in their communities, their overwhelming preference to institutional care. With this in mind, I am pleased to enter more than 600 statements from people, families, organizations about the impact of HCBS for older adults and people with disabilities into the congressional record. Our witnesses will also discuss the importance of including these populations in decision-making processes that directly impact them. This is why today I'm reintroducing my Strategic Plan for Aging Act. This bill will help states create multi-sectoral plans for aging, including those who are aging with a disability, while ensuring the needs, preferences, and views of the people directly impacted are prioritized in the development and implementation of a plan. I am especially proud to introduce this bill today on the International Day of Person with Disabilities. People with disabilities should always be included in decisions about their lives, health, and well-being. I look forward to the discussion about my Strategic Plan for Aging Act and will help create inclusive and effective state plans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, all of whom work to ensure aging Americans and seniors with disabilities age in place, especially during the holidays, to ensure they remain safe and engaged. First, I'd like to introduce John Offerdale. John, who proudly hails from the great state of Florida, is the president of Offerdale's Hand Off Foundation. In 2012, Mr. Offerdale established the Offerdale Hand Off Foundation. His organization's mission is to, quote, feed the needs of those in crisis, in partnership with business, government, civic, and faith-based organizations. When the COVID pandemic hit our nation, Mr. Offerdale saw a need and stepped up in a big way to serve seniors in Broward County. Mr. Offerdale, please, thanks for being here. Please begin your testimony.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee, it is an honor to speak with you today about an issue affecting millions of older Americans, ensuring that seniors can age in place with dignity, safety, independence, and meaningful human connection. As mentioned, my name is John Offerdale, and I am the Hand Off Meals for Seniors president. We are an Older American Act, home-delivered meals service provider in Broward County. I've been a resident of Broward County since 1986 when Coach Shula drafted me as a Miami Dolphin. I went on to spend my entire 8-year NFL career in South Florida. Since then, my wife and I have owned restaurants and been involved in charitable works, including our own Offerdale's Hand Off Foundation. So how does an NFL linebacker become a provider of senior meals? Hand Off Meals was born during COVID when Miami Dolphin owner Stephen Ross reached out to Dolphin alumni, who are also restaurateurs, to produce and deliver emergency meals in the neighborhoods surrounding Hard Rock Stadium. With additional support from generous partners, we delivered more than 1 million meals across Broward County, many for homebound seniors. In the years that followed, emergency COVID funding through the Area Agency on Aging of Broward County and the Florida Department of Elder Affairs allowed us to continue this work. By 2023, our team had delivered hundreds of thousands of fresh, restaurant-quality meals to vulnerable seniors and families who needed them most. The success of these efforts led the Broward AAA, under the leadership of CEO Charlotte Mather Taylor, to rethink a new model for its home-delivered meals program. For the first time, rather than awarding one contract to the lowest cost frozen meal provider, our program, Hand Off Meals, was one of 4 contracts awarded after a competitive bidding process. Today, Hand Off Meals for Seniors is the leading meal provider in Broward County, delivering more than 4,500 fresh, restaurant-quality, home-delivered meals every week. Now, this is why I'm here today. I want to emphasize why the improvements in this model matter. Broward County reflects the future of our nation. Florida has one of the highest concentrations of seniors in America, and Broward's population of adults over 85 is projected to increase by 169% over the next 25 years. The choice between aging in the home or entering institutional care often hinges on improvements unleashed by competition. Here are 4 improvements we have driven so far in Broward County. 1, Competition among providers promotes better quality, better services, and outcomes. Providers like us are food-centric, not large institutional frozen meal brokers. Most meals we deliver include fresh salads, sandwiches, fruits, vegetables, versus institutional frozen meals. While fresh ingredients and real-time production are more expensive, local production in scattered restaurants across Broward County creates a decentralized pickup points that make the system efficient and sustainable. 2, competition among providers inspires innovation and efficiencies that lower costs. Providers can leverage a restaurant's purchasing power, fixed costs, and community commitment to provide high-quality meals at a sustainable rate, discounting profits in service of the community-oriented mission. 3, competition among providers invigorates public-private partnerships. Funding partnerships have expanded, supported by organizations like the Jim Moran Foundation, Community Foundation of Broward, Miami Dolphins Foundations, public charities, Walgreens, to help cover the gap between public funds and the elevated cost of quality restaurant fresh meals. And 4th, competition among providers gives seniors more choice. Seniors retain personal agency over their choice of meals, delivery, relationships, and aging-in-place decisions. So in conclusion, this is the kind of improvement we all hope to see from our government programs: better outcomes, lower costs, invigorated partnerships, and more choice. Competition among home-delivered meal providers is good for the body and soul of our aging-in-place seniors. At every level, this work is a public-private partnership, and the Older American Act is the backbone of the team. As Coach Shula taught us, in life as in football, it takes a team. So Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee, the Handoff Meals for Seniors program demonstrates what becomes possible when fresh, high-quality nutrition is paired with consistent human connection and allowed to compete for the hunger and heart of our seniors. I invite every member of this committee to visit us in Broward County, meet our volunteers, talk with our seniors, and join my wife Lynn and me on one of our weekly meal deliveries. I truly believe you will be inspired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Overdahl. Now we're going to hear from Jason Resendez. He is the CEO of National Alliance of Caregiving. In this role, he spearheads research, policy, and innovation initiatives to build wealth, health, and equity for America's 53 million family givers. Please begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the role that family caregivers play in enabling older adults to age in place in their communities. My name is Jason Resendez, and I'm the President and CEO of the National Alliance for Caregiving. For nearly 30 years, we've documented the experiences of America's family caregivers. And right now, we are living through a profound demographic shift. Every day, 10,000 Americans turn 65. This is a tremendous achievement, but it presents challenges that largely fall on the shoulders of our nation's family caregivers, who make up the backbone of our nation's long-term care system. These are our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our family members, many of you, and they've never been under more pressure. According to our landmark Caregiving in the U.S. 2025 research with AARP, 63 million Americans, nearly 1 in 4, now provide care for a loved one who is aging, seriously ill, or is living with a disability. That's a nearly 50% increase since 2015. This surge mirrors a critical reality. 70% of older Americans will need long-term services and supports during their lifetime. Caregiving has become more prevalent, more intensive, and more isolating. 1 in 3 family caregivers are in the sandwich generation, providing care for children and adults simultaneously. On average, they spend 27 hours per week providing care, and nearly 1 in 4 provide 40 or more hours weekly, the equivalent of a full-time job. These caregivers provide complex support. More than half administer medications, manage special diets, and change feeding tubes. And family caregivers enable something Americans overwhelmingly desire: the ability to age and receive care at home. This matters for two fundamental reasons. First, dignity at home. When people age in place, they maintain control over their care and their lives. Second, simple economics. We can support more than 2 people at home for the cost of 1 person in a nursing facility. But despite their heroism and their economic value, caregivers face a growing crisis. Nearly 2/3 experience high emotional stress. 45% report physical strain. Nearly half have experienced negative financial impacts because of their care responsibilities. And these impacts are not evenly distributed. Caregivers of color, rural, lower income, and youth caregivers face the greatest hardships. For example, 28% of lower income caregivers cannot afford basic expenses like food, compared to 8% of higher income caregivers. Congress recognized this reality 25 years ago when it created the National Family Caregiver Support Program through the Older Americans Act. The program provides what caregivers need most: respite care, counseling, training, and referral services, acknowledging the vital role that family caregivers play in supporting older adults. Yet we must go further. Under current Medicaid rules, access to institutional care is an entitlement, while staying at home requires a waiver. We need to flip this paradigm. The right should be to remain in your home with institutional care as an option, the backup, not the default. Consider this: as of 2020, just 12 states spent at least half their Medicaid long-term care dollars on home and community-based services for older adults and adults with physical disabilities. That means 39 states still spend the majority on institutional care. In these places, older Americans and people with disabilities who need long-term support often don't have real options to stay at home. The Older Americans Act demonstrates what's possible when we invest in keeping people at home through home-delivered meals, transportation, and caregiver support. We must reauthorize and fully fund Older Americans Act programs to strengthen the aging network that connects family caregivers with the support they need. And we must pair these investments with smart economic policies that recognize the true value family caregivers contribute to our economy. We already have a strong legislative foundation to build on. The multi-generational home caregiver tax credit, led by Senators Scott and Welch, acknowledges the essential work that family members provide within intergenerational households. And the Family Act, introduced by Ranking Member Gillibrand, would establish a national paid family and medical leave program, giving workers the security they need to care for loved ones without sacrificing their financial stability. Along with the Older Americans Act, these bills represent concrete steps towards building a care infrastructure that supports families across generations. After nearly 3 decades of listening to family caregivers tell their stories, one truth is undeniable. These are ordinary Americans doing extraordinary work that benefits all of us. When we invest in family caregivers, we strengthen families and build communities where no one faces their hardest moments alone. That's what makes community living possible. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Resendez. Now I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand to introduce our next witnesses.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I'd like to introduce our next witness, Allison Barkoff. Professor Barkoff is the director of the Hirsch Health Law and Policy Program at George Washington University. Professor Barkoff led the Administration for Community Living, ACL, in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2021 to October 2024, serving as ACL Administrator and Assistant Secretary for Aging. Previously, she served as Special Counsel for Olmstead Enforcement in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Professor Barkoff, you may begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing on community living and aging in place. My name is Allison Barkoff, and I have more than 25 years' experience in disability, aging, and community living policy. The vast majority of older adults and people with disabilities want to live in their own homes and communities instead of in nursing homes or other institutions. It allows them to be with family and friends, participate in community activities, work or volunteer, and age in place. Community living is cost-effective and leads to better outcomes. And federal laws and Supreme Court precedent establish the right to receive services in the community instead of in institutions. The demand for community living is growing exponentially, with more than 10,000 people turning 65 every day and disabled people living longer, often with aging caregivers. There has been bipartisan support for policies and programs that make community living possible. Many older adults and disabled people require assistance to live in their own communities and age in place. I'm going to briefly discuss the major programs that provide these supports. First and most importantly, Medicaid funds home and community-based services, or HCBS. HCBS includes home care, senior day programs, disability employment supports, respite care, and more. Neither private health insurance nor Medicare cover these services, and most people cannot afford to pay out of pocket. Medicaid law requires states to provide institutional care, but HCBS are optional. States can cap enrollment in HCBS programs, leading to more than 600,000 people on waiting lists. The aging and disability communities have urged Congress to address this institutional bias and put HCBS on equal footing with institutional care. Despite their optional nature, states have been steadily expanding their HCBS programs. These efforts must continue and accelerate to meet growing demand and need. Yet reductions in federal Medicaid spending to states could put optional services like HCBS at risk for cuts. Older Americans Act programs also help people age in place. They support 1 in 5 Americans over 60 with personal care, transportation, family caregiver supports, home-delivered meals, and more. OAA programs complement Medicaid. They can serve people who aren't yet eligible or on HCBS waiting lists. Annually, they save hundreds of millions of dollars to Medicare and Medicaid by preventing unnecessary emergency room, hospital, and nursing home admissions. Many OAA programs already have waiting lists, and demand is quickly growing. Reauthorization of the OAA and increased investment in its programs is critical to helping older adults age in place. Other programs provide community living supports for disabled people of all ages. This includes independent living services and Developmental Disabilities Act programs that help people access community services. Demand for these programs similarly outpaces need, and continued investment in them is essential. We often forget about the H in home and community-based services, but people cannot live in the community without a home that is both affordable and accessible. Less than 5% of housing stock is accessible, and many older adults and disabled people spend more than a third of their income on housing, often foregoing medical care or food. Many are at risk of homelessness, and in fact, older adults are the quickest growing homeless population. Federal housing programs are also critical to community living. Finally, the Administration for Community Living funds and oversees community living programs and leads cross-agency initiatives to address barriers like housing and workforce shortages. Importantly, ACL coordinates to ensure that older adults and disabled people are considered across federal policies. ACL has been impacted by HHS's reduction in force, losing almost half of its staff this calendar year. Congress should ensure that ACL is sufficiently resourced to fulfill its statutory mandates, support its programs, and coordinate policy across the federal government. Thank you for this opportunity to testify about the importance of community living and what it takes to make that a reality for the millions of older adults and people with disabilities in this country. Thank you.
I want to move to our next witness, Emily Landau. Ms. Landau is a disability rights activist, author, speaker, and digital communications consultant. In her current role, she provides consultation and editorial services and manages online presence and communications strategies for multiple disability-related organizations and initiatives. In addition to her written work being published in outlets including New York Times, Self, Salon, Vice, HuffPo, Ms. Landau is author of Demystifying Disability, What to Know, What to Say, and How to Be an Ally. Ms. Landau, you may now begin your testimony.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished committee members, I am honored to testify on this auspicious day, as December 3rd is the International Day of People with Disabilities. I am a proud disability advocate, and my mission is to harness the power of storytelling as a tool to expand accessibility and inclusion for all. As a 34-year-old, my story may seem out of place at a hearing about aging in place, but the disability perspective is especially pertinent to today's focus on the impact of community. I want to emphasize that more than 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a disability, and of this group, 43.9% are adults aged 65 or older. For those who are not yet disabled, there is a significant likelihood of aging into disability. Neither a person's age nor disability status should ever be a barrier to being among loved ones in our homes and communities. When I was a teenager, my parents and I took a trip to Florida to visit my grandparents for a holiday celebration. At the time, my grandpa was in the midst of an extended hospital stay, but his doctor permitted him to come home for a few hours to join us for a holiday meal. As my family was cooking, I sat with my grandpa while he opened the day's mail. He began to weep over the simple act of being able to do a task in his own home. It is the only time I ever saw him cry. And as I look back on this moment, I realize just how strongly it underscores the immense importance of being home, and not just for the holidays. I was born with my physical disability, so I know well the essential nature of supports and services that empower me to thrive at home and in my community, and how fortunate I am to have had access to them throughout my life. When my mom, who has the same disability as me, was born in 1961, a family member suggested that my grandparents place her in an institution. 30 years later, when I was born, no one made this suggestion to my parents. Instead, following my stay in the neonatal intensive care unit, a public health nurse connected my mom with resources to ensure that I would receive the care I needed. Because of this, I was able to have regular physical, occupational, and speech therapy starting at just a few months old. By the time I began kindergarten, I was approved for ongoing home and community-based services, or HCBS, thanks to the New York State Care at Home Medicaid waiver. Medicaid provided me access not only to vital therapeutic services, but also to home modifications that enabled me to function as independently as possible in my family's home. Medicaid also assisted in the acquisition of durable medical equipment, such as my power wheelchair. As you can see by the fact that I'm here today, my wheelchair gives me freedom to be out and about in the community. Unfortunately, the Medicaid asset limit, which has been a mere $2,000 for over 35 years, became prohibitive to my future career and relationship goals. In my early 30s, I found myself at an inflection point. I wanted to forge ahead in my career and build a life with my partner, but I was trapped in an inflexible system that imposes caps and penalties on people in exchange for access to life-saving services. So, with family support, which most people cannot afford, I took a risk and decided not to reapply for Medicaid. That said, what I am sharing is not a success story about transitioning off Medicaid, as this choice has meant foregoing needed care, such as in-home physical therapy multiple times per week, which I can only access through the Medicaid program. The story here is that HCBS provided by Medicaid was what set me up for success. This past October, I married the love of my life, and my husband and I are now seeking a community to call home near our families in New Jersey. We're searching for somewhere accessible for my physical needs at this stage of our lives, as well as for our future needs, so we can safely age in place. This search has proven arduous in a housing market where accessible homes are nearly non-existent. Our experiences are a stark reminder that the stakes of today's hearing are much higher than heartwarming tales of being home for the holidays. Without access to HCBS and without efforts to prioritize housing in communities that work for everyone, people with disabilities and older adults will all too easily be pushed out of our homes and communities and into institutionalized settings, denied opportunities for everything from education and employment to recreation and socialization. But we won't be the only ones missing out. Our friends, families, colleagues, and neighbors will miss out on all we can contribute to our communities, both socially and economically. This isn't just about making treasured holiday memories with loved ones, although that is a beautiful part of the human experience. It's also about fostering a country where all of us can grow older, assured by the notion that we will always have a place to call home. Thank you.
You know, it's you have a choice. It's cold in New Jersey. It's not so bad in Florida. It's pretty nice right now. Now we'll go to questions. Let's start with Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. And I think Florida is experiencing a massive influx at the moment. He continues to be a cheerleader, having been the former governor and contributing so much to its success now and why so many people want to move there. But we will always welcome others. In fact, we are known as the Sunshine State, but we're also known as the Silver State for a good reason. Almost a quarter of our population is considered seniors, and that is why on this small committee, you have the two Florida senators both participating and engaging on these very important issues. They affect so many of Floridians, and we think it's important. And we welcome a Floridian with us today. We're so glad to have you, so proud of you and your career, but not just what you accomplished on the field, but certainly what you have done for your community since. Such a benefit to the state of Florida and those that call Florida home. So thank you for being with us. Aging in place is so very important, and we know that the Older Americans Act in many ways helps with stability and meaningful assistance to families who are often stretched thin by caregiving responsibilities. And I think a hearing like this is so very important. So I thank Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand for convening this hearing, focusing on specific programs, yes, but also overall on the Older Americans Act and how it provides critical support to seniors and their families. It also helps build community for a growing number of seniors in America who are living alone. Some of the statistics, according to the National Council on Aging, show that 28% of adults 65 and older live alone. And as we approach the end of the year, we're reminded that many seniors will face this holiday season in isolation. And so we want to ensure that the Older American Act continues to offer programs that help older adults strengthen their connections and build supportive communities, so this doesn't have to be the case. With that said, I have a few questions for our witnesses, and certainly I wanted to, listening to your testimony, I'm kind of going to go off. I planned some subjects I wanted to talk about, but I was really interested in your testimony, Mr. Resendez. You were talking about how there's kind of a flop of where we should be prioritizing, where we're focusing our resources. Right now, I believe you have to have a waiver to stay at home. And you were commenting on some proposed legislation, specifically by Senator Scott, regarding a tax credit. Can you tell us, would any of those concerns be addressed by either the proposed legislation, and if not, what would you recommend for Congress to address to kind of right-size that approach?
Absolutely. One of the key things to your question around Senator Scott's legislation is the immense financial strain that family caregivers face. Nearly 50% of family caregivers report experiencing at least one negative financial impact due to caregiving. Out-of-pocket costs, conservatively, due to caregiving is around $7,000 a year. And a lot of those expenses are not tax deductible. So anything we can do for the tax code to better recognize the contributions and expenses associated with caregiving can help to alleviate some of those financial strains that family caregivers face. And then on the imbalance, what we see is an imbalance in between home and community-based spending at the state level and spending on institutional care. So there are examples where states are making efforts to set targets for rebalancing dollars towards more or less costly home-based care versus institutional care. So there are options to explore to rebalance that spending at the state level.
And I know there are many of us that are pushing to re-up the Older Americans Act. I've co-sponsored that. I know both our ranking member and our chairman are pushing for that. Are there specific things within that legislation that would address that imbalance?
The Older Americans Act, as Allison highlighted, greatly complements home and community-based services. So fully funding and reauthorizing the Older Americans Act, increasing funding for the Older Americans Act. One of the things that we see in our data is between 2015 and 2025, we've seen a nearly 50% increase in the number of family care. It's 20 million more family caregivers.
And what was that span that you were saying that increased by
10 years.
10 years.
10 years. 20 million more caregivers in 10 years, yet funding for the Older Americans Act and the National Family Caregiver Support Program specifically has remained relatively the same. So the demand has increased significantly.
But in your testimony, though, you mentioned that you believe if we took away this the incentives that would push people into institutional care as opposed to at-home caregiving, that you believe we might even be able to save money by doing that, because I think you said, and I could be wrong, that it's twice as costly to care for someone in an institution setting versus being at home. So with this rise in demand, are you saying that we could still save money per person if we were to shift those resources to in-home caregiving?
Absolutely. Helping folks provide care in their homes for longer enables us to save on things like the cost of institutionalized care, the cost of ER visits. So when we support people providing care in the home, we can save money over the long term. We've seen that within the Older Americans Act, for example. One of the things that we've seen from research for Older Americans Act programs like the National Family Caregiver Support Program and Respite is that family caregivers report that when they have that support, they can provide care for longer durations.
So we may be able to mitigate the increased costs associated with the increased demand, 50% more in a decade, by shifting that to more in-home care.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moody. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the four of you for coming on out here. Ms. Barkoff, I'd like to bring you in on this conversation, just given your background here. In your testimony, you stated home and community-based services include a wide range of care and support that neither private health insurance nor Medicare even cover. Medicaid funding allows for services to exist and ensure people can comfortably age in place. Yet, there are lots of concerns about Medicaid cuts, and I guess I wanted your thoughts on this. Could you share how cuts to Medicaid can lead to devastating impacts for home and community-based services, and what consequences this would have on programs that serve older adults and people with disabilities?
Thank you, Senator Kim, for that question. And as you mentioned, the primary funder and the way we are able to help keep the majority of older adults and people with disabilities in their own homes is through the Medicaid-funded Home and Community-Based Services Program. States must have balanced budgets, and we have seen historically that despite the huge demand for more home and community-based services, that when budgets are reduced, states, the first thing to go are optional services. As my colleague, Mr. Resendez, spoke about, the fact that institutional care must be provided to anyone who meets that level, but if you want to choose to get in-home care, you have to sit on a waiting list. What we saw, actually, I conducted a study with other researchers about what states did during the Great Recession when we saw cuts, and every single state cut home and community-based services around the 2010 to 2013 timeframe, despite wanting to be able to serve more people. So as states are beginning to look at their state Medicaid budgets, implement new laws, it's very, very important for the aging and disability communities to make sure people understand it is a penny wise and a pound foolish to make those kind of cuts.
And as we're thinking about strengthening the home and community-based services, we also need to be addressing the workforce shortages that limit access to those services. So the Administration for Community Living, ACL, is a critical component of achieving that, which is why it's so critical that it stays intact. So from your experience, Ms. Barkoff, with ACL, could you share what federal strategies would be most effective to support recruitment, training, and retention in the direct care workforce?
I was very proud that during the time that I was leading ACL, we really heard from stakeholders about the importance of strengthening the direct care workforce and launched the Direct Care Workforce Strategy Center. It's very critical to work directly with states on how we can improve these jobs. We need to have better pay. We need better opportunities to advance in these careers, and we really need to bring respect to these jobs. It's critical that as states are implementing these new rules, we are already starting to see cuts in rates to providers, which translates to even lower rates to direct support professionals and direct care workers. And if someone can get paid more working at Target or at McDonald's than doing this incredibly important but not well-paid work, the shortages that we have will be so much worse.
Yeah. Ms. Ladau, I wanted to just bring you in on this as well. You shared, you said, quote, without access to HCBS and without efforts to prioritize housing and communities that work for everyone, people with disabilities and older adults will all too easily be pushed out of their homes. But you also shared the risk you are taking as well by not applying for Medicaid due to asset limits being so restrictive. I guess I want to ask you, how should Congress address the reality that even with HCBS, many people with disabilities cannot benefit from these programs because of a lack of readily accessible housing and the financial reality that qualifying for HCBS makes it difficult to rent or buy a home?
Thank you so much for this question, Senator Kim. And as a newer resident of your state who is currently in the process of searching for a home, I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because people with disabilities are so often trapped in this catch-22 of wanting to be able to live at home and thrive in their communities, but then facing the significant red tape that comes with getting the supports and services that they need. And so for me, I faced the quite frankly impossible choice of, do I stay on these life-sustaining Medicaid services, or do I recognize that the asset cap is holding me back and take a flying leap, quite frankly, to leave this program? It is an unfair choice that no one should have to face. And I really want to name that this is not a choice that anyone should have to make. But the answer is not to cut funding for HCBS. It's actually to make economically savvy policy choices that would, first of all, focus on incentivizing accessible housing stock and raising the asset limit for Medicaid. So right now, the asset limit, which I mentioned in my testimony, is $2,000. That hasn't been adjusted for inflation. That hasn't been adjusted since before I was born. Yeah. So when you think about that, I mean, that alone is reason enough to deter people from wanting to pursue a career, to pursue finding a house because they're stuck by this asset limit. And the other thing I want to name is I did a little research and double checked, and there's a study from 2023, the Kaiser Family Foundation found that the cost of long-term institutionalized care was around $11,000 more expensive than HCBS for Medicaid beneficiaries. So ensuring policies that complement rather than contradict each other just makes good financial sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you. With that, I'll yield back, Chairman. All right.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Mr. Overdahl, what role do local partnerships such as nonprofits or faith-based groups play in extending the reach of OAA services?
Okay. Nonprofits play a huge role. Specifically, this year in the fourth quarter, our handoff meals for seniors kicked off a campaign for volunteer delivery drivers. We find that volunteers coming especially through faith-based organizations like churches and synagogues really have a heart for people and to serve them, not only to deliver them food. So our efforts were pretty strident. Our goal was 150. We got to about 35, but it ain't over. And we're going to continue to work hard on that because we find that our paid delivery drivers engage, they do wellness checks, but they have a delivery that has to go on to the next house. Our volunteers really are the ones that are looking for a relationship, a connection with our seniors. And they have the ability to come in and just address and look for those concerns in the environment of the home, maybe appliances or things that concern them with the behavior or the acuity of maybe their seniors, and then refer them back to our aging district. That type of connection is so much more valuable. So volunteers are a huge part of that. Again, our faith-based agencies that hopefully provide most of those will be coming stronger and stronger. And it takes a while. We've been in this for 1.5 years, going on 2, and we got another 3 years, so we really want to build that up.
Thank you. Mr. Resendez, what local approaches other than congregate meals have been most successful in reducing social isolation among older adults, especially during the holiday season?
Absolutely. Through the Older Americans Act specifically, there are a range of services provided through the Aging Services Network that help to address social isolation, including and especially for family caregivers. We see in our research that 1 in 4 family caregivers experiences social isolation. That's actually up from what we saw just 5 years ago. So things like individual counseling, support groups, and training for family caregivers provided through the National Family Caregiver Support Program helps us to address that growing trend around social isolation.
Thank you. Ms. Barkoff, what we hear frequently about the sandwich generation concerning people who are caring for both children and aging adults. How do AOA programs better support these families and benefit seniors who are trying to age in place?
The Older Americans Act, actually, one thing people don't know about the Family Caregiver Support Program is that it supports basically any family caregiver who is caring for, who is more than 50 years old and caring for anyone other than a child with a disability. So it actually has a whole breadth of caregivers that are part of those programs. And the Older Americans Act provides supports like respite and the support groups that Jason mentioned, but it also helps families access services. So if you are caring for a child as well as an aging parent, you may be able to take advantage of senior centers and adult day programs that can really help. Respite care is critical to family caregivers, and that combined with some of the disability programs that the ACL also funds can really provide a great complement of programs to support all types of caregivers, including sandwich caregivers.
Thank you, Ms. Leydow. What steps can local communities take to make holiday programs more accessible for older adults who are not only trying to age in place, but also have disabilities as well?
Thank you so much for this question. And as I mentioned during my testimony, this has far-reaching implications well beyond simply celebrating the holidays. But during the holidays, people should be able to access festivities like anyone else. And first and foremost, I think about the fact that many festivities are closed to certain people simply because they cannot access their family members' homes because those homes are not accessible. And so when we're thinking about how we can increase inclusion within the community, we first need to be thinking about the housing stock and how we can improve and incentivize creating accessible homes. For programming within the community, we need to be thinking about how we can do it in an accessible way. So for example, many local towns, including the one that I used to live in, have holiday shopping events where you go around, you support local businesses. It's meant to be a boon for the local economy. However, as a wheelchair user, I often cannot get into many of these local shops because they are not made wheelchair accessible, thereby excluding me from the festivities, but also excluding my wallet from the festivities. So when we're thinking about how we can create fun and accessible holiday festivities, we need to be mindful of the fact that these shops need to be accessible, not just for a Christmas shopping experience or a Hanukkah shopping experience, but all year round, and the economic impact will pay in dividends.
Thank you. Let me turn it over now to Senator Alsa Brooks.
Thank you so much to Chair and Ranking Member for holding this hearing today, and thank you as well to each of our witnesses for taking time to be here. You know, I often speak in this committee about my own experience, and I know that my experience is so similar to so many other Americans. As a caregiver, as a member of what's known as the sandwich generation, and it is true that every single day I balance my role as a United States Senator with that of being a mother and a daughter. ensuring that my aging parents have the care they need as they navigate the health challenges that, if we live long enough, will surely come. So countless Americans share my story and strive to make their own family members live with dignity and access to the care they need, and yet so many are left without the resources or necessary community support, and many more seniors are without family to advocate for them or the resources they need to afford to care, and they unfortunately slip between the cracks. I just can't imagine what the average American does. I have to tell you, in my own experience, I had a really sweet moment just last night with my mother who has dementia. And it was, my father has been her caregiver now for the last couple of years. And like so many families, it is often the caregiver who then becomes sick. And so he was recently given a really, really serious cancer diagnosis. And so it has just brought to bear the struggles that so many have with having the care they need at night, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, it continues to help me understand how important this is. So I'm joined here today by tremendous advocates for seniors and individuals with disabilities, including the former Assistant Secretary for Aging and head of the Administration for Community Living under the Biden administration. And I'm also proud to introduce the Strategic Plan for Aging Act, along with Ranking Member Gillibrand, building upon the great work that my state is already doing to support community living for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And so my first question for Ms. Barkoff is, Professor, would you really, I want to just mention that Secretary Kennedy has gutted the agency that you used to lead with a reduction in force. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to briefly share for the record the importance of that agency's work in advancing independence for older adults and people with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Senator Alsobrooks, for that question. ACL is the only federal agency focused on community living for older adults and people with disabilities. And what many people don't appreciate is that ACL does not only fund and oversee and support the incredible programs that we've been talking about throughout this hearing, but it plays a critical role in coordinating across all of HHS and the federal government to make sure that older adults and disabled people are considered in all policies. And as you mentioned, ACL has been significantly impacted by the reduction in force. Less than half the staff remain. The entire policy team, evaluation team, every single one of its regional staff, the grant team, the budget team, the communication team, and external affairs. And ACL is having a hard time doing what it needs to do to be able to play the critical roles in supporting the aging and disability networks and the unique role that it plays in coordinating programs. So I hope that Congress will continue to fund ACL and HHS will continue to staff ACL to be able to meet its statutory mandates and the critical role it plays in community living.
Thank you. And you know, there was, you mentioned the staff cuts, but there have been staff cuts in the proposed reorganization of the Administration for Community Living, as you mentioned, undermine the agency's mission to help seniors and others living with disabilities. And the Baltimore Sun reported last month as well on the disturbing proliferation of unlicensed assisted living facilities in my own state. And these facilities are housing elderly and vulnerable residents in substandard conditions, all in exchange for their Social Security or disability checks. And they're engaging in a practice experts call benefit or senior trafficking. And so, Professor Barkoff, you have extensive experience working both to protect seniors and individuals with disabilities and going after bad actors that abuse these populations from both your time at HHS and the Department of Justice. And so can you give us, talk to us about how the states, you know, how can we give states the tools to better monitor and go after these bad actors and prevent them from operating unchecked?
Thank you for that question. And I also saw this report, and the abuse and neglect and exploitation in these types of unlicensed assisted living facilities, unfortunately, is not limited to Maryland. It exists really across a number of states in these boarding care homes or adult care homes. And it's incredibly important. ACL plays a major role in implementing elder justice, the adult protective services programs, the long-term care ombudsman program, really working with states to prioritize how to identify this type of abuse and neglect, how to make sure law enforcement knows how to work with these networks. And what I can unequivocally say is when you look at, and this committee has had a number of hearings on the resources available to adult protective services and ombudsmen, it is minuscule compared to the serious abuse and neglect that is happening to older adults and people with disabilities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Thank you. To Allison Barkoff, average electricity costs have risen 11% since January of this year, which is more than 3 times the rate of inflation. Families just can't keep up with the spiking costs, particularly older adults on fixed income, in the winter when heating costs are necessary to keep them alive. Approximately 2.4 million Americans rely on the LIHEAP program, Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, just to afford their energy bills and make cost-efficient repairs to their heating systems. Can you tell us what ways does LIHEAP support older adults and people with disabilities' ability to live in their community of choice, and how would funding cuts to LIHEAP impact this population?
As you mentioned, so many older adults and people with disabilities are living on fixed incomes and are low income, and programs like LIHEAP are incredibly important to help them be able to afford to stay in their own homes and communities. LIHEAP is a program that is targeted to the people who are most vulnerable to adverse health conditions when they don't have access to adequate cooling or heating. And the statistics based on HHS's own data is over 42% of LIHEAP goes to households with older adults, and more than 35% to households with people with disabilities. So cuts to this program can make remaining in the community and aging in place both unaffordable and unsafe.
Thank you. For Emily Landau, this past weekend we commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or the IDEA. IDEA guarantees students in preschool and K through 12 a free and appropriate public education at the least restrictive setting possible. The Department of Education plays a crucial role in making this guarantee a reality for millions of students across the country, including 550,000 students in New York State. However, I was alarmed at the targeted reduction in forced notices that were sent to the Office of Special Education Programs within the Department of Education during the government shutdown, and they sent a letter imploring the administration to immediately reverse these RIF notices. Ms. Landau, can you talk about how important accessibility and reasonable accommodations are for students K through 12, and how cuts to the Department of Education will impact our students with disabilities?
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand, first of all, for your advocacy to ensure that access to education for all children remains intact, and also for bringing up this very vital topic. And I really want to be sure to draw a very clear connection between this question and the topic of community living, because being able to live at home and be the beneficiary of HCBS is such a vital part of the equation that actually allows kids with disabilities to attend school, which was true for me because I grew up attending a local public school, and I had a Section 504 plan that secured the reasonable accommodations that I needed to fully participate and succeed in school. And so both IDEA and also Section 504 of the Rehab Act are really essential protections for students, and the Department of Ed plays such a vital role in enforcing these laws and distributing resources. So I, like you, have grave concerns about these efforts to dismantle the Department of Education through reductions in force, funding cuts, and also relocation of key programs like moving the Office of Special Education Programs to exist under HHS, which I do believe could send this country backward towards segregating students based on diagnosis rather than expanding educational opportunities. So I'll just wrap up by saying that I believe the changes that this administration is currently pushing are not going to, as they claim, quote, improve outcomes by empowering parents, states, and communities, but instead threaten the futures of more than 7.5 million students with disabilities who, like all students, should have access to education as a pathway to graduation, college or career training, employment, and, of course, economic opportunity in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. For Mr. Resendez, today we have highlighted the services and supports that older adults and people with disabilities need to live independently. These services and supports are often provided by direct care workers who assist older adults and people with disabilities with activities of daily living, such as dressing and bathing in home settings. Unfortunately, these workers may face systemic challenges and turnover in this workforce approaching 80% they already faced this in 2023. More recently, the Department of Labor has published a proposed rule that would exclude home care workers from minimum wage and overtime pay protections. It's why I'm introducing my Domestic Workers Bill of Rights Act next week to patch the flaws in existing labor laws to ensure that workers who provide home and community-based services and other domestic workers have the same rights and dignity as workers in other professions. Could you please speak to the importance of the direct care workforce and to both home and community-based services, and elaborate on some of the challenges this workforce faces and how protections like those outlined in my Domestic Workers Bill of Rights could help?
Thank you for the question, Senator Gillibrand. One thing is clear: family caregivers rely on direct care workers. We see this in our research. 1/3 of family caregivers use paid help. Direct care workers, home health aides, to help support their care recipients. This partnership between family caregivers and direct care workers is essential. Without adequate paid help, family caregivers will shoulder more intensive responsibilities, with 24% already providing 40 or more hours of care a week. Our research shows that 28% of family caregivers now have difficulty finding affordable services like in-home health care, up from 22% in 2015. So anything that we can do to stabilize the direct care workforce benefits not just these essential workers, but also millions of family caregivers who rely on them as being part of care teams to deliver care in the home sustainably for long periods of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Offerdale, what lessons from the Broward County pilot could be replicated nationwide to modernize home-delivered meals?
Great question. So one of the things that our district did was it RFP'd for multiple service providers, and the 4 service providers that got awarded, 2 of them were restaurant-centric service providers. 2 of them were catering service providers. The combination kind of covers all the gamuts. It's a great combination. Personally, I think one of each category is probably more manageable by the aging district, but giving that, the catering can do customized, they can do kosher, they can do a lot of different things. The restaurants can do on-time production with fresh quality food. It provides a great choice, a specialization of both service providers, but a choice to the senior that I think they need, all right? The agency for a senior is critical in home care, but in also the choice of food. So I think that alone, at the same time, the restaurant providers can contract out with other restaurants for specific meals to create variety. We had a relationship with Padrino's Cuban Cuisine. That type of fresh quality food in Broward County really connects. So the ability to do that along with others, it has to be profitable for the subcontractor, but they often will discount their profits to be part of a community engagement program that, brings a lot of awareness and charity to them. So I'm very excited because I have another 3 years to kind of test this model and continue to improve it. And at the end of the day, I totally believe that the seniors who are homebound will receive the benefit of that effort.
That's great. Mr. Resendez, how would a targeted tax credit for adults caring for aging parents help families manage the pressures associated with multi-generational living?
So we see one of the ripple effects of family caregiving is financial impact. Nearly 50% of family caregivers experiencing at least one negative financial impact, 2/3 experiencing 2 or more negative financial impacts, including going into debt, taking out high interest rate credit cards and loans. So anything we can do to recognize the economic value that family caregivers contribute and the economic cost of caregiving on families is a step in the right direction. We know that family caregivers spend on average $7,000 or more on out-of-pocket expenses to support caregiving. Think about things like adult diapers and things to make your home more suitable for caring. Those things are not tax deductible. So targeted tax credits can help us in the tax code better recognize and value the contribution of family caregivers, particularly those within intergenerational households. So we know that 40% of family caregivers are living with their care recipient. That could be a grandparent taking care of a grandchild. It could be a son caring for his spouse or his wife or his grandmother or mother with a serious illness or a functional limitation.
Thank you. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Sorry. For Allison Barkoff, today we have highlighted how we can support older adults and people with disabilities so that they can live in their communities. One way to enhance supports and services for older adults is multi-sector plans for aging. These plans are state-led, cross-sector strategic planning resources that help states transform the infrastructure and coordination of services for older adults and their families. Today, I will reintroduce my Strategic Plan on Aging Act. The Strategic Plan for Aging Act creates a grant program under the Older Americans Act to incentivize and support states to create their own multi-sector plans for aging with aging and for people with disabilities. Professor Barkoff, could you speak to how a multi-sector plan for aging can improve supports and services for older adults, and what benefits of including direct input from older adults and people with disabilities in the development of these plans?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership here. As we've talked about today, it takes a lot of different supports and services for people to age in place and stay in the community. That's community-based services and affordable housing and accessible transportation and affordable healthcare, and that cuts across so many state and local agencies, sectors, providers, and types of advocates. And comprehensive and coordinated planning is absolutely critical, and that's why more than a dozen states have begun this comprehensive planning through multi-sector plans on aging. I so appreciate in your bill and in your comments, you're highlighting that the experience of people with lived experience is critical. They are best positioned to be able to say what works and doesn't work in the current system and where gaps are. It's also incredibly important, and we're seeing more and more with states, that people are including the disability community in those efforts. As we've heard today, the largest population of disabled people is older adults with disabilities, and the common needs and priorities cut across so many areas. Finally, I'll just mention when I was at ACL, seeing the huge momentum, we worked on developing a strategic framework for a national plan on aging, and we tried to model exactly what we were seeing in states, bringing across agencies and departments with expertise. So thank you again for reintroducing that act that I think will give a lot of momentum and resources to existing state efforts and really encourage that important aging and disability partnership.
Thank you, Allison. Emily, I want to ask about some of the challenges during the holidays that people with disabilities are often facing. First of all, accessibility for air travel. In 2013, 11,527 wheelchairs and scooters were mishandled by airlines. This mishandling can lead to costly repairs and leave wheelchair users without the technology they need to get around. For many people, it's not just losing a chair, it's losing their independence. Chairs are extremely expensive. That's why I was disappointed to see the Department of Transportation was delaying the implementation of regulation that would address these harmful trends. So can you discuss the importance of accessible transportation, especially accessible air travel, and how delaying implementation of this regulation will impact people with wheelchair users? And the second question I have is about web accessibility, because obviously when you're planning any time to go home, you use the internet to book your air travel, you use the internet to find hotels, you use the internet to do everything, and we've really not met our requirements of making the internet accessible at all. In 2022, this committee released a report that found web accessibility failures throughout the federal government, including at agencies such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Department of Veterans Affairs. The VA's own reporting said approximately 90% of websites at the Department of Veterans Affairs were not fully accessible for people with disabilities as required by law. So maybe just touch on these two things and anything else you want to bring up.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I'm happy to talk about these issues. I want to first actually address the web accessibility part. This is very much intertwined with travel because you often need to book your travel through a website, and if that website is not accessible, it immediately precludes you from being able to book your travel independently. And this is an issue not just for people with disabilities, but for older Americans who may struggle to keep up with ever-evolving technology. So, think of engaging with video content, think of watching a movie with captions. Accessibility benefits everybody. It just makes sense to implement accessibility, and it makes the user experience easier for everyone. And when it comes to air travel, goodness knows we need all of the improvements on experience we can get. I will say that I am one of the 11,000 plus people who has had my wheelchair damaged in the course of a given year. And I'm going to be very honest that it made it very difficult for me to go visit my grandmother before she passed away. She lived in Florida. I was not able to go see her because I was so afraid of my wheelchair breaking on an airplane that I instead chose not to make that trip because it was going to be so incredibly challenging, knowing that my wheelchair had previously been broken. When I flew across the United States from New York to Oregon, I found that my joystick had been completely sheared off when I landed and had to hold it together with duct tape and with zip ties. And I would just ask everyone to imagine if that was somebody's legs that were being held together with duct tape and zip ties. So all of that is to say that whether you are visiting a loved one, whether you are taking a holiday trip, whether you're a grandparent using a scooter who just wants to enjoy Disney World with their grandkids, you should be able to travel knowing that your mobility equipment will arrive intact. And this is an essential form of community living because it is indeed participating in the community. So it's not just the right thing to do, it also makes economic sense to keep people moving around the world safely. Thank you.
This question for Jason. Thank you for discussing the Family Act in your opening statement. The Family Act would create a national family and medical paid leave program. Specifically, it would establish 12 weeks of paid leave for serious medical and family events, including the need to care for a loved one. Can you go into further detail on why the Family Act is necessary? What kind of hard choices are American families forced to make when paid family leave is unavailable? Does the National Alliance for Caregiving have any caregiver stories that highlight those challenges?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Gillibrand. First, I want to say that there are 35 million family caregivers who provide care while working at the same time. So without paid leave, these millions of family caregivers face impossible choices between providing essential care for loved ones, including older adults with serious conditions like Alzheimer's or cancer, or maintaining their financial security. And according to our data, they often sacrifice both, leave jobs, deplete savings, and take on debt, with long-term consequences for their own retirement security and economic stability. In fact, half of all working caregivers report going in late, leaving early, or taking time off to provide care. We heard from one such family caregiver, Marcy, a family caregiver in Kansas, who provides care for both her mother and also her grandson, who is ultimately forced to leave her job because of her caregiving responsibilities. She told us, "They needed more time than what I had. and I couldn't take any more time off work. I was working 60 hours a week and coming home and doing everything too. To lose that income, it was a big hit. If we don't do more to help family caregivers balance both the care that they need to provide and the work they want to do, we're going to see more and more examples like Marcy's.
The ranking member and I would like to thank everyone for being here today and for the work you all do to support older Americans and the families who care for them. Age in place is not only what many older Americans want, it's also better for their health and better for their families. The pressures on the sandwich generation are real, and they grow heavier this time of year. Community-based support and OAA programs help lighten that burden and keep families strong. For 60 years, the OAA has been the backbone of critical services that promote independence and social connection for older adults. That's why this committee remains committed to working in a bipartisan way to reauthorize the OAA and strengthen programs to help seniors age in place. I look forward to continuing to work with members on this committee. If any senators have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, the hearing record will be open until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Thank each of you.